My name is Charles Earl Boles, born 1829. For 8 years, I robbed the most powerful company in the American West with an empty gun, left poems at the crime scenes, and then walked back to San Francisco and had dinner. The detectives hunting me had their offices 4 blocks from my hotel. I knew their names. I am going to tell you exactly how that was possible, and exactly how a clean white handkerchief with a laundry mark ended it. The year was 1875, California. The nearest fort to where I worked was 3 days walking through country that had killed better men than me. Mountain lion terrain, no water on the ridge lines, and in winter a cold that came off the Sierra like something with a purpose. A letter from those hills took 3 weeks to reach San Francisco. Nobody was coming if something went wrong because nobody would know until the stage didn't arrive. And even then they would argue about it for 2 days before doing anything. I want to be clear about one thing before I go any further. I was not a young man when I started. I was 46 years old. I had been a soldier, a farmer, a miner, and a failure at most of what I tried. I had a wife named Mary back in Illinois and 4 children I had not seen in 8 years. What I did not have was anything left to lose. And that is where this story begins. Not with the robbery, but with the man who decided to do it. Because that decision did not happen in a single moment. I was born in England and came to America before I could walk, Jefferson County, New York. My family were farming people, and we lived the way farming people lived then, which is to say we worked hard and stayed poor and did not complain about it because that was simply what life was. In 1849, I went to California with my cousin David. Gold rush. We were young and the whole country had gone crazy and we went with it. We found very little gold. David got sick on the way home and died. I went back to New York with nothing and started over. I married Mary Elizabeth Johnson in 1854. She was a good woman. We had 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. Ida, Eva, Lilia, and Arian. I farmed. I tried to make it work. The land in Illinois was not generous, and I was not a natural farmer, and by the early 1860s we were scratching at the edges of things. Then the war came. I enlisted in August 1862. Company B, 116th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. I will not spend a long time on the war because this is not a war story. What I will tell you is this. I fought at Vicksburg. I fought at Champion Hill and Big Black River Bridge. I was wounded twice. I rose to first sergeant. When it was over, they breveted me to lieutenant for what they called gallant and meritorious service. I came home in June 1865. I was 36 years old and I had seen things that do not come out of a man once they get in. I tried farming again. It did not work. I tried to be the husband and father I was supposed to be. I was not good at it. I was restless in a way I could not explain to Mary and did not try to. In 1867, I left for the West. Mining. That was the reason I gave. I told Mary I would come home with enough for us to live the rest of our lives. I meant it when I said it. I want to be clear about that. I wrote to her from Montana, from Idaho. Regular letters at first. I told her the country was hard. I told her I had not made $1 in months. And somewhere in those letters I started writing things I should not have written, things that showed where my mind was going. I wrote to Mary once, "Mark my words, I will yet make those bloated money bags Wells Fargo disgorge." That was the seed of everything, right there in a letter to my wife, years before I put on the flour sack. The last letter Mary ever got from me was postmarked Silver Bow, Montana, 1871. After that, she never heard from me again, not once, not in 17 years. I want you to understand what that means. 4 children, a wife, a home, and I just stopped writing. I did not die. I did not disappear into the wilderness. I simply decided that Charles Boles was done, and I put him down like a man puts down a tool he has finished using. What happened in the years between that last letter and the first robbery is not well documented because I did not document it. I moved around California. I worked claims that produced nothing. I watched Wells Fargo's agents ride in their coaches while the men who actually worked the ground went hungry. I watched the company take its percentage of everything that moved through those mountains. Freight, mail, gold, the labor of men who had nothing left after they paid the freight, and I felt something settle in me that had been loose and moving since the war. It was not a feeling exactly. It was more like a calculation. A man who has been cheated enough times eventually does one of two things. He accepts it, or he doesn't. I didn't. Here is what I need to tell you about the walking, because the walking is how all of it was possible and nobody has ever fully explained it. I covered 50, 60 miles at a stretch through the California mountains. Alone. On foot. No horse. I had a deep dislike of horses that I never fully explained to anyone and do not intend to explain now. I would leave San Francisco dressed like a gentleman, walk out of the city, and within a day or two I would be deep in the gold country hills, the dry brown ridges above Calaveras County, the chaparral country above Sonoma, the timber above Shasta, terrain that a Paz's could barely track a horse through, let alone a man on foot. I had learned to read terrain in the war. You learn it fast when getting it wrong gets men killed. I could look at a topographic line and know where the grade steepened, where the coach would slow to a crawl, where a man could stand in the road with time to spare before the wheels came around the bend. I scouted every route before I used it. Sometimes I walked a road 3 times before I stopped a stage on it. The flour sack I cut myself, eye holes, nothing fancy. Over that I wore a long linen duster. I carried the shotgun, unloaded, always unloaded, and I arranged sticks in the brush on both sides of the road to look like rifle barrels covering the driver from the tree line. That was the whole operation. Sticks and an empty gun and a polite voice. The credential for all of it was the war. 3 years of infantry had made my legs into something that did not tire the way ordinary legs tired. My feet were hard. My body knew cold and wet and hunger in a way that made the mountain nights feel like a moderate inconvenience rather than a crisis. I had walked through worse. I had slept in worse. I had been shot at with actual loaded weapons by men who were trying to kill me, and I had kept moving. An unloaded shotgun and a flour sack were not going to unsettle a man like that. The first time I did it, on a July morning in 1875 at a place called Funk Hill, 4 miles from Copperopolis in Calaveras County, I stepped into that road as calm as I have ever been in my life. And what happened next changed the next 8 years of everything. The stagecoach came around the bend the way they always did on that grade, horses blowing, wheels grinding, the driver working the brake with his boot. John Shine was his name. I stepped out of the manzanita brush and I leveled the shotgun and I said what I always said. "Please throw down the box." Shine looked at me. He looked at the rifle barrels in the brush on both sides of the road. He did not argue. He threw down the Wells Fargo strongbox. I took the box and the mail sacks and walked back into the brush. I was gone before Shine had finished turning the horses around. He reported later. He finished, picked up the box and mail sacks, and went off in the brush. I could see a couple of gun barrels sticking out from the manzanita brush, and I wasn't going to argue. It turned out later they was sticks. He also said this, and I have always liked this particular description. He wasn't a rough-looking character at all. His voice was deep, but it was refined, educated. He said, "Please throw down the box," like he was asking for a cup of tea. That is correct. That is exactly what it felt like. I walked 40 miles back toward the city. The strongbox had about $300 in it. Not a fortune. But it was Wells Fargo's $300, not mine. And the difference mattered to me more than the amount. I want you to think about something before I tell you what came next. You know what it feels like when you have been wronged by something too big to fight. A company, a system, a set of rules written by people who were never going to be on the losing end of them. And you know what it feels like to finally do something about it, even a small something, and walk away. That feeling. I had that feeling for 40 miles. It did not get old. I went back to San Francisco. I put on my suit. I had dinner. That was robbery number one. I want to tell you about the double life because I think it is the part of this story that people find hardest to believe. And I want you to understand it is not as complicated as it sounds. I lived at the Webb House Hotel, 37 2nd Street, San Francisco. I was known there as Charles E. Bolton, a mining engineer of some means. I dressed well. I carried a gold-headed walking cane. I wore a derby hat. I dined at good restaurants. I attended the theater. I was considered by my neighbors in that hotel to be one of the most refined and agreeable gentlemen they had encountered. None of them knew that the man tipping his hat in the lobby had walked 40 miles through the California mountains 2 weeks before and pointed an empty shotgun at a stagecoach driver. Wells Fargo's chief detective, James B. Hume, had his operation in San Francisco. He was a formidable man. I knew his reputation, and he made catching Black Bart his personal mission. He compiled a description from witness accounts. About 5 feet 8 inches, slender build, piercing blue eyes, gray hair, 2 missing front teeth, a deep and hollow voice, moved with a soldier's bearing. He put up reward money, $800 from Wells Fargo, $300 from the state, $200 from the U.S. Postal Service, $1,300 total for the man with the empty gun. I dined within 4 blocks of where he worked. I am not telling you this to brag. I am telling you because the reason it worked is simple, and anyone who has ever had to be 2 different people in their life will understand it immediately. I did not mix the lives. Charles Bolton never went near the mountains. Black Bart never went near 2nd Street. The man who walked into the theater on a Tuesday night in October was not the man who had been crouched in the chaparral above a stage road 3 weeks earlier. They wore different clothes and answered to different names and never made the mistake of being in the same room. I did that for 8 years, 28 stagecoaches. Not once hurt a passenger, not once fired a shot, not once robbed an individual, only the Wells Fargo box and the mail. When a woman on one coach was so frightened she threw her purse at me, I picked it up and handed it back. "Madam," I told her, "I do not wish your money. I only want Wells Fargo's." She was still holding the purse when the stage pulled away. I said a few things over those 8 years that got repeated in newspapers. Someone asked me once during a robbery why I did it. I said, "Well, it beats working for a living." That got printed. I did not mind. Some of you watching this right now have spent years doing work that built somebody else's wealth. You know what it costs and you know what it pays, and you know those 2 numbers are not the same. I am not going to tell you that what I did was right. I'm going to tell you that every mile I walked into those mountains, I felt like a man who had finally stopped accepting the terms he had been handed. That is a specific feeling. I think some of you know it. I think that is why you are still watching. I have not forgotten what I told you at the start. The handkerchief is coming. But there is one more thing before that. After my 4th robbery, August 1877, I left something in the broken strongbox that I had not planned on leaving. I sat down and wrote a poem. I do not know exactly when I decided to do it. The poem had been sitting in me for a while, I suppose, years of it, pressed down under everything else. I wrote it out and signed it. Black Bart, the P08, P08. That is a rebus. P08, poet. I thought that was clever, and I still do. The poem went like this. I've labored long and hard for bread, for honor, and for riches, but on my corns too long you've tread, you fine-haired sons of bitches. I left it in the empty box. The newspapers picked it up within a week. The name Black Bart spread across California. Every driver on every Wells Fargo route in the northern part of the state was now looking for a man with an empty gun who left poems in the strongbox. After the fifth robbery, I left another one. Here I lay me down to sleep, to wait the coming morrow. Perhaps success, perhaps defeat, and everlasting sorrow. Let come what will, I'll try it on. My condition can't be worse, and if there's money in that box, 'tis money in my purse. I only ever left 2 poems. That was enough. The name was established and the name was enough. Charles Bolton in San Francisco read about Black Bart in the papers over coffee. He found the whole business very interesting. The years built on themselves. I learned which grades worked and which didn't. I learned which routes ran heavy boxes and which ran light. I learned the schedules, the drivers, the seasonal patterns of the mail. I became very good at something that most men would have gotten caught at inside the first year. I did not get caught because I was methodical and I was patient and I walked every mile myself and I never, not once, involved another person. That last part is important. No accomplices means no one to talk. No one to drink too much on a Friday night and say something careless. No one to threaten or pay or manage. Just me and the mountains and the empty gun. There was a cabin above Copperopolis, in the hills where I would rest sometimes between walks. Nobody knew about it. I kept it simple. Woodpile, a tin cup, a place to sleep that was not a hotel lobby. Out there in those hills I was neither Charles Bolton nor Black Bart. I was just a man sitting by a fire listening to the wind come through the pines, watching the gold country go dark. Those nights were something. I will say that much. 40 miles of mountain behind me, another 40 ahead. The strongbox money already spent or on its way to being spent. The cane and the derby hat waiting in the room at the Webb house. Out here, just pine smoke and cold air and the particular silence of a place where nobody knows your name because you burned all of them. I had a physical cost inventory I kept in those years. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Left knee, unreliable and cold. An old war thing. Right hand, 2 fingers that locked up in the wet season from a wound at Champion Hill. Feet that had been hard since 1863 and stayed that way. Back that spoke to me on mornings when the ground had been cold. None of it stopped me. All of it reminded me I was still here. I said a word out loud sometimes sitting by that fire. I said it several times. What I want you to understand about the walking, the actual physical thing of it, is that it was never suffering. I know that is not what you expect me to say. 50 miles through the Sierra foothills sounds like punishment. It was not punishment. It was the only time I was sure of exactly who I was. In San Francisco, I was Charles Bolton. At Funk Hill, I was Black Bart. Out on those ridge lines between the two, walking through country that smelled like dry grass and manzanita, and my own sweat and the particular sweetness of California oak in the heat of the afternoon. Out there I was neither one. I was just a man moving through the world at his own pace with his own legs under him. Nobody owed me anything. I owed nobody anything. The mountain did not care about Wells Fargo. The mountain did not care about Charles Boles and his wife in Illinois and his 4 children whose faces I could no longer picture with any accuracy. I had walked away from one life in 1867 and I had been walking ever since. The robberies were almost incidental to that. The walking was the thing. I do not think I understood that clearly until much later. I understand it now. The robberies continued through the late 1870s and into the 1880s, 12, 15, 18, 20, each one the same, each one another entry in James Hume's file, each one another walk out of San Francisco and back. The reward climbed, the newspaper coverage grew. The name Black Bart became something that people told stories about in saloons from Sacramento to Portland. I ate a good dinner and read about it in the paper and went to the theater. But there was something I had been meaning to do from the very beginning that I had not done yet. something that felt like it needed to be the last act rather than just another robbery. I had started at Funk Hill. I had always intended to finish at Funk Hill. The same road, the same grade, the same manzanita brush. Something in me needed that symmetry. I did not examine the need closely. I should have. November 3rd, 1883. I walked out of San Francisco. 2 days out, I was above Copperopolis. The morning was cold, the way November mornings are in the foothills. Not Sierra cold, not the kind that goes into your bones, but cold enough that your breath came out visible and the frost was still on the north-facing slopes at 9 in the morning. I got into position at Funk Hill before the stage was due. The driver that day was Reason McConnell. What I did not know, what I had no way of knowing, was that McConnell had a passenger that day, a young man named Jimmy Rolleri, 19 years old, a hunter from the area who knew those hills. Rolleri had gotten off the stage at a point down the road to hunt while McConnell took the grade. That is a detail that changed everything. The stage came up the grade. I stepped out. Unloaded shotgun, flour sack hood, long linen duster. Please throw down the box. McConnell threw it down. I broke the strongbox open. I was working fast. I was always fast. But I was 54 years old and my hands were not as quick as they had been. Behind me, up the road, McConnell had found Rolleri. He had handed the boy his rifle. The shot hit me as I was moving into the brush, grazed my hand. I felt it go through, and I ran. I want you to understand something about being shot at when you are 54 years old and alone in the mountains, and the thing you have been doing for 8 years has just come apart. The body does not consult you. The legs decide. The legs said, "Move." I moved. I dropped things, the field glasses, a razor, some food, a belt, and a handkerchief. White cotton, clean, folded, from my breast pocket. A small thing, a gentleman's accessory. Thomas Ware's California Laundry on Stevenson Street had cleaned it and folded it and marked it with their mark. The way laundries marked everything so they could return it to the right customer. The mark was FX07. I did not notice I had dropped it. I was already 100 yards into the brush and moving. I walked back toward the city with a grazed hand and the knowledge that something had gone wrong in a way I could not yet measure. My knee was bad that day, cold and wet, and the miles were harder than usual. I got back to San Francisco. I went to the Webb house. I cleaned the wound. I put on a clean suit. I said a word. I said it several times. Detective Harry Morse. Hume was traveling, so Morse ran the investigation, picked up that handkerchief and held it up to the light. He could read the laundry mark, FX07. He went to the first laundry, not a match. Second laundry, not a match. He was a methodical man, Morse, and methodical men are the most dangerous kind. He went to a third laundry, a fourth. He kept a list. He worked through San Francisco's laundries one by one, day after day, the way a good infantry sergeant works through a problem, without hurry, without assumption, without the expectation that it would be easy. He visited 91 laundries before he found it. Thomas Ware's California Laundry, Stevenson Street. The mark belonged to a customer named C.E. Bolton. The customer picked up his laundry at 316 Bush Street, 4 blocks from Wells Fargo headquarters. Officers came to the Webb house on a November afternoon. I was in my room. I was wearing a good suit. I had my cane. I was, to all appearances, exactly what I had always presented myself as being: a respectable gentleman of means, a mining engineer of some refinement, a man that the other residents of the Webb house had always found agreeable and well-spoken. "This is absurd," I told them. "I am Charles Bolton, a mining man. I am a gentleman. I am a man of means. This is outrageous." They were very polite about it. They looked through my rooms. They found a Bible. Inscribed on the inside cover, Charles E. Boles. They found letters from a woman named Mary, from Illinois. I looked at those letters for a moment. I had not seen Mary's handwriting and I did not immediately calculate the years. Many years. I want to be straight with you about something. I had made my peace with what I was doing to Wells Fargo a long time ago. They had taken from me. I had taken back. I was settled on that. But those letters on the table, Mary's handwriting on envelopes she had sent years before, evidence that she had still been writing to me after I stopped writing to her, that was a different kind of reckoning. She had 4 children and no husband, and she had kept writing. I had been dining at fine restaurants 4 blocks from the detectives hunting me, and she had kept writing. Both of those things were true at the same time. You can understand how a man gets to where I got and still know that certain costs were too high. I have sat with that for a long time. I looked at the officers. "Very well, gentlemen," I said. "I am Black Bart. They convicted me of the final robbery only. I never confessed to the other 27. I pleaded guilty to 1 count, and they sentenced me to 6 years at San Quentin State Prison, November 17, 1883. I was prisoner number 11046. The prison record listed me as 53 years old, though I was likely older. 5 feet 8 inches, gray hair, blue eyes, light complexion, occupation, mining. Those 4 years at San Quentin I will tell you about only briefly because prison is prison, and I was not a man given to dramatizing my circumstances. I was a model prisoner. I did what I was told. I did not cause problems. I kept to myself. I had been keeping to myself for most of my adult life, and I was good at it. There was a reporter who visited and asked if I would write more poetry. "Young man," I said, "didn't you just hear me say I will commit no more crimes?" He wrote that down. It appeared in the paper. The knee was worse in the damp. The hand was worse in the cold. The back, which had been talking to me since 1863, talked to me more. I was 50-something years old in a prison cell, and I had time to take stock of things I had been moving too fast to think about for most of the previous 2 decades. I thought about Mary. I thought about the children, Ida, Eva, Lilia, Arian, who were grown now, all of them, who had grown up without me and who would not have known my face if they had passed me on a street in San Francisco. I thought about what I had told Mary when I left in 1867, that I would come home with enough for us to live the rest of our lives. I had not come home. I had sent letters for 4 years, and then I had stopped sending letters. I had built 2 other lives, one with a gold-headed cane and one with a flour sack hood, and neither of them had room for a family. I had been a soldier who knew how to follow orders, and I had been a bandit who answered to no one, and somewhere between those 2 things the husband and the father had gotten lost on a mountain road and never found his way back. That task that used to be easy and now was hard. In those San Quentin years, the thing I noticed most was the simple act of walking. Long walks had been mine my whole adult life, the one thing I could do that the war and the mines and the years had not taken. In that yard, measuring out the same perimeter day after day, I felt the distance of the mountains more acutely than I had felt anything in years. The smell of chaparral was very far away. The pine smoke from the cabin above Copperopolis was very far away. 40 miles of open California foothills was very far away. I wanted to walk. That was the thing I missed most. Not the money, and not the robberies. The walking. January 21st, 1888. They opened the gates at San Quentin, and I walked out. There were reporters. There always were for something like this. The famous gentleman bandit, 4 years older, gray hair a little grayer, the same blue eyes behind the same weathered face. They had their questions ready. "Will you rob more stagecoaches?" "No." "Will you write more poetry?" I looked at the man who asked. He had his pencil out. He was very earnest. "Now," I said, Didn't I tell you I wasn't going to commit any more crimes? He wrote it down. The other reporters wrote it down. They laughed, some of them. I walked away from the gates. There was a road ahead of me. San Francisco was south, the gold country was east. Illinois was a long way off in a direction I had not faced in 21 years. Somewhere out there, Mary was still alive, I believed. The children were grown. Arian would have been 27, Ida 33. I did not know their lives. I did not know if they would have wanted me to. Wells Fargo detective John Thacker followed me for a while after my release. I was aware of him. I had been aware of detectives for 8 years, and I was not going to lose that skill in prison. I let him follow me for a few weeks. Then I stopped being there. My last confirmed sighting was February 1888, Visalia, California. I checked into a hotel as Charles Bolton. The name went into the register in my handwriting, a neat, refined script, the hand of an educated man. The register closed. That is the last anyone saw of me. There is a California historical landmark marker at Funk Hill now, near Copperopolis, Calaveras County. It marks the site of a robbery. First one and last one, same hill, 8 years apart. The sticks I put in the manzanita brush are long gone. The road is still there. The grade is still steep. On a November morning, it still gets cold enough that your breath comes out visible. No one has ever found a grave with my name on it, no death certificate, no burial record. A man who spent 30 years practicing how to disappear disappeared in the end, without a trace. Whether that was by design or simply by exhaustion, whether I walked into one more set of mountains and did not walk back out, or whether I walked into some other life with some other name, nobody has ever been able to say. What they can say is this: Wells Fargo, the most powerful company in the American West, was robbed 28 times by one man on foot with an empty gun. He never fired a shot. He never hurt a passenger. He left 2 poems. He ate dinner 4 blocks from the detective's office. He got caught by a handkerchief. He served his time, and then he walked out a gate, and the world closed behind him like water closing behind a stone. Some of you watching this right now are sitting in a quiet house at the end of the day. Maybe you retired from something that used up a good portion of your years. Maybe you worked for something or someone who did not give back what you put in, and you found your own way of settling that account, or you didn't, and you're still thinking about it. I am not going to tell you what any of that means. You already know what it means. I just want you to know I had that feeling too. That is what the walking was about. That is what all of it was about. A man who decided he was done accepting the terms he had been handed and walked out into the mountains to find his own. Wells Fargo supposedly paid me a monthly stipend to stop robbing after I got out of prison. The company denied it. I vanished anyway. Do you think they paid me, or do you think I just finally finished disappearing? Yes or no? Write it below. Charles Boles, Charles Bolton, Black Bart, the PO8. The next story I need to tell you is about another man who walked away from everything the world expected of him. A prospector named John Muir, who went into the Sierra Nevada with nothing but a notebook and came back with something nobody had a name for yet. That story starts in the same mountains. It starts about the same time, and it ends in a way that no one who knew the beginning would have predicted. Charles.